So this week on the LIVEcast, we're going to be talking about testimony and we're going to be looking back on a week of mission in Edinburgh. Hello everybody, welcome to the LIVEcast. My name's Pete and I'm here with...
Paul. It's me, still Paul.
Pete and Paul, someone's written something about that, haven't they?
Yeah. And the Peter, Paul and Mary, they were a band, weren't
wow. Yeah,
they?
next
don't know what they wrote, but
no. Yeah, so hi everyone, welcome to the LIVEcast. As I said before, this week we're going to be talking a bit about testimony and we're going to be hearing from Matthew and Kez, two of our other interns, about their time up in Edinburgh.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing about that. Have you been having a good week though? Have you been up to much?
Yeah, quite a good week. Been in Rye this weekend.
Rye, okay. What's in Rye?
What is in Rye? Cobbled streets was in Rye. Yeah, it's quite nice. I can't remember what else was there. But yeah,
my only knowledge of Rye, and I don't even know if it is anything to do with Rye, is the Queen song, "The Seven Seas of Rye." I know nothing else of Rye.
Well, as exampled already, I know little to nothing about Rye. So if you're watching and you happen to be from Rye, you visited Rye, you have a great story about Rye, let us know. We really want to educate ourselves.
Rye Vita, is that related?
Wow, could be.
So, but apparently rye bread, we've learnt this today, rye bread, not from Rye.
We've had a very exciting morning.
It's been a good day so far. Yeah, so you've had a nice time in Rye then. You've
Lovely
been
time.
Doing some good stuff.
Oh, the people of Rye have been very kind to us.
Yeah. The people of Rye.
No, good times. What about you?
Good, yes. It's been an all right week. I think we had our first... pub talk event last Tuesday night up in Crowborough, which is a kind of men's event where we're just getting guys together in the pub. So we had about 25 guys there, and it's mainly like we're thinking of it as kind of like a pre-evangelistic thing. Really, it's very low level. So if you think of something like Life Explored being quite if you think that's a kind of easy introduction to Christianity, then this is like kind of pre that, like just building relationships, and you might then be able to invite towards that kind of thing. Yeah. So we were using some stuff. Mostly it was just, come get together, have a chat. Mm-hmm. But to kind of get past just trivial, hello, who are you and what do you do? We've got some stuff called Table Talk. There's a whole set of Table Talk stuff for all different kind of occasions, but this one's Table Talk for blokes. So it's been done with Christian Vision for Men. And there's 6 kind of sets of cards that it comes with, and each has a conversation starter. And so the one we had this week was around the topic, is life more than a solo journey? And so I kind of just did sort of a couple of minutes, really informal, sharing some thoughts on that as a conversation starter. And I basically just kind of said, look, you look at, you got your action heroes in the films and stuff, and they're all kind of all singing, all dancing, the whole package. And we kind of know that's not really how life works, that John McClane takes on 35 terrorists and doesn't, just walks away and is fine. But then we hear about people who call themselves, I'm a self-made man, but even that's not really true. We're all kind of, we've always had other people input into us and invest in us, whether it's parents or whatever and stuff. And just this idea that, for me, and so I just kind of said, for me as a Christian, it makes sense that life isn't a solo journey, because I believe, we come from a God who is a, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, a God of relationship. So we've come from relationship, we're made for relationship. And, don't we think relationships are the best thing, in the world? You can go to something that's pretty pants with your family or with your friends and you go, well, it was rubbish, but it was kind of fine because I was with these people. And so we were just that was kind of the level of it really in terms of input from the front, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then it was just, the rest of the time was, for people to kind of talk about that. And so you can either, what they've got is 16 for each kind of question. Or each topic, they've got 16 questions that go with it on cards that you just put out on the table, and people are free to either use them or not use them at all. And there's no order to them, and you might chat about one for the whole time, or you might chat about 4 or 5, and everyone might input on something, or only 1 or 2 people might want to chat. And they're anything from, on last week's one, they were anything from what would your fantasy sports team be, through to kind of like, why do some men find family life hard, or what do you gain from a solo lifestyle? What do you lose from a solo lifestyle? And actually, we just, from the feedback we got, it would just work quite well, because there was no it's not particularly structured or forced on people. And, I just thought the table I was sitting on, it was just good to kind of chat about stuff. It just helped us, it wasn't super deep, so we didn't feel like we had to bare our souls or anything particularly. But it was more than just kind of the average chat about, like I say, triviality. So, that was good, and we're kind of looking forward to doing more of those. And we've got a curry night coming up next week. We've kind of got 30 guys signed up for that at the moment, so hoping to build on that and just see where that goes. So, yeah, it's been quite positive. So,
I assume my invitation has been lost in the post.
No, I just didn't invite you. So
it happened again.
I should point out, for anyone who thinks that's harsh, I mean, we don't live in the same town, so that's the reason. But I mean, you're very welcome to come.
Thank you very much.
And if you're in the Crowborough area and you want to come, hit us up. Come along, come for a curry next week, Tuesday night, Tuesday the 11th. I don't know what I'm saying. No one's going to come.
They might come.
Randomers. Bill Lavelle from Texas. He's coming. Great. So we are talking a bit today about testimony. And Pete, you've done a little video on testimony recently, haven't you?
Yeah. So one of the interns, a guy called Nick, he's been editing up kind of part of my story. Well, it's not really my story, it's God's story.
We're going to find out. Yeah.
So Nick's been editing that together and put it out over the weekend. And we thought we'd build on that with a bit of discussion on it today and
some exposure.
Yeah, that's it. Shine a bit of light on testimony and So we're gonna take a look at it.
Yeah, if you've not seen it, we'll put the whole thing on now. So let's have a look.
At 18, I travelled to Australia for football trials. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Probably should have seen that one coming. But I decided to stay in Australia and spend a year living, working and travelling. God was very much an afterthought for me in those days. I might pray if I was in trouble or if I needed something, but other than that, not so much. The time I spent in Australia granted me access to a lot of things I thought would fulfill me. For so long, going to Australia and living this life of sunshine, travel, surfing, drinking, girls and partying, that was my main ambition. Partying, alcohol and girls were very much the holy trinity for me back then. I've literally lost count of the amount of times I must have stumbled out of some horrible dive bar during the course of that year and then spent the next day on a beach hungover. But that was my big dream. The ideal scenario and the perfect life. My mind was just a mixture of Hollywood and MTV, and I always just thought if I could have that lifestyle, then I'd be living my best life and my heart would be content, that I would feel fulfilled. And it was confusing for me because it wasn't the something more that I'd been longing for. It didn't leave me fulfilled. And it was kind of scary too because the next question quickly follows, what's wrong with me? Why am I still not content despite all this? Coming home from Australia and being back around family and friends and loved ones that I'd missed during my time away in Australia kept some of those questions off my mind for a while. But one of the things that did happen during my time home was that I was able to reconnect with an old friend of mine called Phil, one of the most decent guys you could ever wish to meet. We just meet up and go for drinks and make up stupid songs, just have a laugh, have a good time. Just one of those people, it's pretty rare in life that you just connect with, that you just feel at home with. One of the most decent people you could wish to meet. But one thing I didn't love about him was that he always wanted to share his faith with me. And I remember one day just snapping back at him a little bit. I'd had enough by that point. And I just said, why can't you let me believe what I believe? And I'll let you believe what you believe. I'll never forget his response. He said, Pete, if what I believe is true, then I care about you too much to not share it with you. You know, we all need friends in our lives that care enough to tell us the hard truths from time to time. And Phil was that friend for me. After our conversation, he said, I'm going to give you a plain English copy of Mark's Gospel. It's short, written in plain English, it won't take you long to read. But what I want you to do is go through it and underline and circle anything you think is rubbish or doesn't make sense. And then we'll get together and we'll chat. If you're still not interested after that, I'll respect your decision. And so at 20 years old, I started reading about Jesus for the first time. And what I saw was a challenge, because I knew what I was expecting to see.
I was expecting to see some religious figure who had a few good sound bites, surrounded by self-righteous do-gooders and suck-ups. Someone who spoke a good game, but in reality just enjoyed a position of power to lord over others. But the gospel proclaims the real Jesus. And instead of this religious bigwig I was expecting to see, I saw compassion with skin on, mercy on legs, justice personified. Jesus taking the hand of those who had been treated unjustly. In Jesus, I saw true love in human form. He was walking around the place, forgiving people of their sins, healing the sick, confronting religious hypocrisy, bringing hope to the poor, the destitute and the broken, and saying the kinds of things that if a God of love truly existed, you might expect him to say. And I realized as I read the Gospel of Mark that Jesus and religion didn't have a lot in common. In fact, they are very, very different. And I remember thinking to myself, if God is like this guy, if God is like Jesus, well, that changes everything.
Cool. So really good video there. And if you're using social media and stuff, do kind of get sharing it out, because I think it's going to be a really good, a really useful thing for people to hear and see. Pete, just give us a sense then about what, when you were kind of putting that together, like what made you want to make that video, and kind of in terms of putting stuff into a testimony. I guess there's loads of stuff probably you didn't say as well, because I guess you can never fit everything in. What kind of stuff were you thinking about? I would definitely want to mention this, I want to get this in, and kind of why. So
yeah. So I think the first thing was we were kind of looking at making something, around 4 to 5 minutes, 5 minutes tops, really. Mm-hmm. Just for the sake of giving people something they could stick with. But no, I think listening to me for more than 4.5 minutes is enough for anybody. But
well, I did say when I watched it the first time that I got to the end and I wanted more. So
there you go.
More
there
Pete.
We go.
That's what I needed.
Backed by popular demand, the sequel. Yeah, but no, I think in the first instance that was kind of our thought process would be kind of 4.5, 5 minutes. And like you say, the hard thing, well, one of the hardest things from our point of view was how do you cut down kind of 31 years of living into 4.5 minutes. That's the tricky thing. But yeah, we kind of landed on the end in the end of doing something along the lines of kind of that process of starting to think about there being more to life. Spent a bit of time away in Australia, as you would have heard in the video, and I think through that process found that a lot of the things I was kind of really thinking would fulfill me and grant me that kind of contentment that that each of us seek. I kind of found that actually those kind of worldly pleasures that Australia granted me, they were they weren't what I thought they were going to be, and kind of going through the thought process of trying to work out why that was seemed like a good kind of starting point, and just to go through from there and then talk a little bit about kind of some of the experiences of just opening up God's Word for the first time and actually taking a look, because I speak to a lot of people who would be maybe a little bit critical of Christians, and they would say, oh, you guys just accept the Bible and you don't really know that much about it, and I think the truth, unfortunately that can be true for some Christians, but I think it's true for a huge amount of atheists. They've rejected the Bible without ever really looking, and
sure,
that was my story. I just rejected it. I'd never really taken the time to look, and when a friend of mine called Phil challenged me to take a look for myself, I saw that as an opportunity to basically prove him wrong. Because I kind of said to him at the time, I was like, I really like our friendship. I don't love the whole evangelism part of it, but I like you. So in my mind, I think I probably thought I'll just read the gospel, point out all the ways in which it's inconsistent, point out all the ways in which it's foolish and wrong and doesn't make any sense, and then we can kind of move on and just have our friendship without the evangelistic endeavour of Phil. So that was the plan, and actually just picking the Gospel of Mark up for the first time and reading through, and there was some stuff in there I was surprised to see. So yeah, very much so. And just kind of as I alluded to in the video, just looking at the person of Jesus and being really surprised. Really surprised. It wasn't what I was expecting to see.
What surprised you? Because I guess the thing for us as Christians, I think, is a danger, is that we kind of think people know what Jesus is like already. We just kind of assume people have picked up on it through culture in some way. Although, I guess, we should be aware that that's probably less and less the case now than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Were there particular things that you kind of went, oh?
Two particular things that stood out. One was, I could be wrong about this. I think it's Mark 2. Where
That's fine.
It's somewhere in Mark, I guarantee it. But yeah, I think it's Mark 2. But Jesus is eating with sinners and tax collectors, and the religious leaders say basically, if you're a big deal, then why would you sit and eat with these people? And Jesus says, it's the sick that need a doctor, not those who think they're healthy. And that was really shocking for me, because I read it, and first and foremost I'm like, well, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And I think it kind of clocked in my mind as well, if a God of love did exist, then that would probably be the sort of thing he would say. And so that line really caught my attention and stuck with me, that kind of compassion, that depth of compassion for people. And you kind of look in our modern day and you sort of think, well, there might have been a super kind, super compassionate person who might have said something along those lines, which would have been memorable. But at that time, in that people group, in that setting, for someone to stand up to the religious leaders, for the lowest of the low, and say, these are the people I've come for, that was really striking. That was. And
really so you beautiful. Were kind of genuinely unaware that was the kind of stuff Jesus was.
Yeah, massively. And and I think that's been my experience working in a church setting and stuff, and being part of the endeavour of kind of reaching out to local communities back in Ipswich, has been that we, as those who are part of church for a long time, we think that people outside of the church know the stories, and the reality is nowadays they don't.
Yeah,
they just don't. And so reading that for the first time was really really caught my attention, and it's so encouraging for those of us who are seeking to go out and be involved in evangelistic endeavour, because I think sometimes we get stuck in the grind. We get stuck in the week on week efforts of evangelism, and inviting people and people saying, oh no, not this time, or the other little discouragements that happen throughout the course of the year. We get stuck in the grind and we forget how appealing Jesus is. And actually just reading about him, it was almost, I think for me, just reading some of the beautiful things that came out of his mouth, I was like, I want this to be true. Yeah. But that's not enough in and of itself.
Sure.
But it was a first step.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like, actually, I want this to be true, but is there any good reason to believe that it is, rather than just a nice story that I can get on board with because it's nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was very much a first step for me. And I think the second thing that really grabbed me was Jesus going head to head with the religious leaders, and those verses that sort of, Jesus says, you place heavy burdens on the people and you don't lift a finger to help them. And I think truthfully that had always been my limited experience of Christianity. I'd go into the big old and cold church buildings that just smacked of religion with very little kind of relationship or personality or anything like that. And so my thought about Christianity was that it was just this kind of old and cold religious system.
Yeah.
And to see the warmth of Jesus, the compassion of Jesus, the mercy, the personal nature to get alongside people who are really suffering, and to give them ultimate hope, and to tell them that God's not this religious bigwig where you've got to fix your life before you can come to him, but actually he just wants you to come as you are because he loves you. And that was so, in a sense, shocking, but also in another sense it kind of just connects with your heart, because I think deep down we know that's what God should be like.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I think no matter what your kind of background, I think deep down we all know that God is, or at least should be, this being that loves his creation, and so to see that in the person of Jesus was really, really captivating, and ultimately to have my view challenged that he's not just one of the religious pack.
Yeah.
He's something different, and so they were two big kind of starting points for us.
Cool. It's interesting. Those are the 2 points, and Yeah, it really makes me wonder about sometimes what we're doing in church, about the way we come across. You know, if because it should be so obvious, shouldn't it, that church is full of sinners and the kind of people that, you know, Jesus says, "I come for these people." You know, and for you to kind of find that a surprising thing, I just think, like, what kind of image are we putting out as Christians if people don't realise that's what we are? And then, you know, also the kind of Jesus going head to head with the religious authorities, you know, the religious bigwigs. I guess it just strikes me that for the average person out there who's maybe not a churchgoer, they probably just look at us, the Christians, as being like the religious authorities. And again, I just think, like, are we, you know, what are we doing if we're the ones, if we don't look like we're broken sinners, we're putting on some different show like we're the pious, righteous people. And if people look at us as if we're these religious bigwigs, you just think, like, man, we're not always getting this very right. I mean, obviously we won't get it very right, but
Sure.
It's worrying, isn't it, that that's the image that people outside the church have of what Christianity and Christians are like, I suppose. But
yeah, and I think for me, growing up, the only thing I would have really known about Christianity would have been what I'd seen on the news, which is almost, you know, is inevitably going to be negative, isn't it? 'Cause that's the bias. So I think coming face to face with a person of Jesus was a big deal, and you know, unsurprisingly so.
So good to hear a little bit of your story and to get a bit more on that, and then obviously to have it put on that video is great, because that's going to be a really kind of encouraging thing for people, I think, to be sharing out and using. And then you've helpfully put together kind of 5 points about testimonies. So we think about, you know, with Pete giving his testimony on the video there, we thought, well, we could chat a bit about that here today. And well, Pete, why don't you kick us off with some of your thoughts on sharing testimonies and stuff?
Yeah, Steve very generously declared that these will be helpful. I hope and pray that is the case. But yeah, we tried to put together 5 points along the lines of just helping people think through how to kind of present their own story. And actually, you know, for those of you listening to this, you might look at it and say, well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that one. But even if it just prompts you to think, actually, why don't I agree with that point, and how would I do it differently, then hopefully by God's grace that'll be helpful. But yeah, like you say, we put together 5 points, and the first of which is your story is not boring. Your story is not boring.
Yeah, so where does that kind of come from? Why might people think their story is boring?
Well, this comes from me hanging out with Christians who think their story is boring and being quite frustrated by that.
Yep.
You know, I think a lot of people just sort of think, oh, they have this kind of mundane, middle of the road testimony that people won't find interesting. You know, they'll sort of say, oh, you know, I grew up in a Christian household and it's always been, you know, part of my life and things like that. And so, yeah, and you know, I think part of this as well is that, you know, we're in a stage where a lot of churches that do outreach events and include testimony in it, they try and include testimonies that are quite I don't know how to describe them, quite
I can't think of the right word, but they're the kind of things that you can put on a poster and or a Facebook post and it grabs people, you know, so and so who did this. I don't want to start saying things, and there's nothing wrong with those stories, obviously.
No, absolutely. You know, I think they're a hugely important part of things for a lot of people. But I think when those kind of stories of, oh, you know, I came off of an addiction, or, you know, I went through this terrible breakup, or I had this extreme thing happen to me, and you know, God peeled me up off the side of the street, or that kind of thing. And you know, I think when those testimonies go out, they're obviously good and important things. But I think when it gets to the point where other people who have more kind of everyday testimonies feel as though their story is no longer important or memorable or significant, I think it then becomes a shame and a problem, because actually there are some people out there for whom those testimonies they'll really connect with, and they'll speak into their own story. But there'll be a lot of people as well who will go, actually, that's so far removed from my life that I can't connect with that. And so actually hearing a story that is a little bit more kind of everyday, they will find elements of that by God's grace that they do connect with. And so part of this for me is just about saying, look, don't be someone who would say, oh, you know, my story's just normal, it's just mundane, it's just everyday. Because actually, number one, that's not true. because as I alluded to earlier, it's God's story, it's not your story. And if God's part of a story, then it's not going to be boring. It's not going to be mundane. It's not going to be regular or everyday. So it's already a supernatural story. So it's already exciting by definition.
Yep.
And so, I think if, for anybody out there who feels as though their story is just not that appealing to people, you have to remember that your story culminates with God's Son stepping down from heaven, entering into our broken world and giving himself on the cross for us, shedding his blood for us. That's how your story ends, and that is not a boring story at all. And so, for me, I'm quite passionate about hearing people's stories and going, hey, do you know what? That part, that's really going to speak to so-and-so, or that part would really speak to someone who's been through that. I think sometimes we just dumb ourselves down, and I think we get over familiar with our stories as well. For me, I would probably look at my story, which is nearly 15 years ago now, the one that was on the video, and because I'm so familiar with telling it, I sort of just get so used to it that I think, there's nothing amazing about it. But that's just not true. Any time we're sharing what God's done for us, it's not boring, it's not insignificant.
I guess whatever the story is at the end, or not the end of it, but at least part way through it, a miracle occurs where someone goes from being dead to alive, and I mean that's going to be a pretty good story, at least. I suppose the classic one, isn't it, where people kind of think, my story is not very exciting, it's I was raised in a Christian family and I always went to church. That's the kind of one where people kind of sit there and go, oh yeah, that's all I've got, and I don't think it's very interesting. But actually, we when I was doing youth work, we used to do a segment, we used to do a meeting or part of our program once, I can't remember how often it was, once a term or maybe twice a term, where we just used to get someone from the church family in, and we just used to interview them. So I think we just got some pizza and we brought this person in, and we made a real effort, actually. I remember discussing as leaders, we had a few people who had incredible stories, and I almost died, that kind of thing, and waiting for a transplant or whatever it was, or growing up in kind of horrific circumstances. But then we also made a real effort to say, to get people in whose stories were much more kind of the average everyday experience. I don't use average in the sense of not exciting or anything, but just, I suppose the reality is for 9 out of 10 of us, most of us haven't had completely radical experiences, being kind of pulled out the gutter or whatever in some sense. It has been much more everyday in some sense. And we just kind of wanted to, because we didn't want to give the young people the impression that you had to have this story. And I remember someone once saying, if you're doing a good testimony, what you should do is you should sit down and you should think, what was I like? What was it like before I knew Jesus? And then what was it like when I was coming to know Jesus? And then what's it like now? And that's not a bad thing, and I think it works quite well in certain people. But there were some people who were just I can't really remember a before. There wasn't a moment. We just gradually, and I'm a Christian, they'd grown up in a Christian home and family, and so they didn't feel they had this kind of dramatic thing they could share. But actually, I find that everyone, even if you think your story is relatively mundane, when you start to burrow down into people's stories, you suddenly go there's a lot of stuff in there about people you didn't know, and history and things, which again, like you say, you get familiar with your own story, and so you're used to hearing it, but other people haven't heard it. Other people don't necessarily know about you. And I think about my story, and I can think, I know what I was like when I was a teenager and whatnot, and I can think back to that, and I can see the difference it's made, being a Christian. But actually 99% of people who I'm spending my time with on a daily basis have no real knowledge of Paul, 17 years ago, whatever it was. So then, there's all those things to uncover there. So everyone's got this story.
Definitely. And I think part of it is just connection as well, and for every person who would say, my story's just normal, I grew up in a Christian home or whatever. You never know who's sitting listening to this. It could be someone who has grown up wishing that they were part of any family, and actually to hear the story of someone who's always had this one day a week where they can turn up and be part of a congregation of 50, 100, 200 people who care about them. That could be immensely touching. And so, I think we need to every single one of us, no matter what our story holds, we need to move away from this idea of, my story's boring, it's not going to help anyone. I think there's an element of that in which actually we just need to trust God's sovereignty a bit more as well. That he can use the weakest of the weak, the smallest things that seem so insignificant. He can take them and run with them and do incredible things.
And the flip side of that, I guess, is so there'll be lots of people who have that kind of, my story's not very interesting, but still kind of under this, think about this same idea here, that you can be at the other end of the scale, can't you, and still not really feel your story is something you want to be sharing. And you've come into contact with someone like that before, haven't you?
Yeah. So we sort of got point 1 and then point 1.5, which was
all
kind
under
of
one heading,
one umbrella heading. But just the second point within this is to not be ashamed of your story. We were talking earlier, and I was saying to you about this guy I'd met out in Zambia who he was actually a Canadian fella, and he was just living and working over there full time. I was just out there for a couple of short-term mission trips. But I met him and heard about his life. He was very generous to share his story with us, and he had probably one of those stories which was, kind of total 1,000,000% transformation in terms of circumstance.
Yeah.
He really grew up in an environment which was kind of drugs, depression, real kind of despair, intangibly so. And he was sharing his story with me of how, God had really picked him up out of this terrible situation and transformed his life, made him a brand new person. And he, one of the things he said to me that I'll never forget, he said, I hate telling my story. He said, I hate telling my story, but I make myself tell it again and again and again, because what a terrible waste it would be to keep to myself all God's done for me. And that really spoke to me, because it was just, the amount of times we sort of think to ourselves, God did this or God did this, but actually no one's gonna really be interested in that. And he just said, no, look, this is what God's done for me. I'm totally unashamed of it. This isn't a story that paints me in a good light, but this is what God's done for me. This is who he is. And I'm going to keep making myself share it again and again and again. And you could tell he wasn't trying to be the star of the story. He wasn't interested in glorifying himself. He was just saying, do you know what, actually, I got some issues, but this is what God's done for me, and what a waste to keep it to myself.
So I guess it's amazing, isn't it, that you with those two ends of the spectrum there, you've got people who want to disqualify themselves from the process, like either my story is not exciting enough, or I don't really want to talk about my story. Even one group is saying I've not got this amazing story, and then there's the other group who have got like amazing stories.
Sure.
And everyone's kind of going, I'm not really sure. And actually maybe the heading for this should be, don't disqualify your testimony. Maybe for whatever reason. But
yeah.
Great. Let's move on, because I'm aware we are wanting to keep moving swiftly. So the second one you put here is, your testimony is not just how you became a Christian. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, we always get drawn into using the language of testimony as just purely, this is how I became a Christian language, when in reality, testimony is just about saying what's been happening to you.
Yeah.
And so actually, God's constantly at work in our lives, constantly speaking to us about different things. We're journeying through life with God, and so I think it's just about living who you truly are out loud, and recognizing that testimony isn't just something that happened however long ago you were converted, but it's something that's happening all the time. What's God doing in your life right now? What's God talking to you about? Where are the areas where you can feel God really kind of shaping you and changing you? And it's strange, because in a small group environment, we would probably talk about those things quite openly. But then when we get out and we talk to non-Christians, we feel like that part of our life needs to be kind of hidden a little bit more. But yeah, I think just recognizing that God's constantly doing different things in our lives, and just to be able to talk about that openly with non-Christians and say, no, this is what God's talking to me about right now, can be enormously powerful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, we definitely fall into the trap, don't we, of and then I became a Christian, end of the story. But I think Glenn actually has a few helpful sentences that I think he uses in some of his evangelism training to do with that. Things like, he says, finish the sentence. How the thing I love about Jesus is, or the thing I love about church is, or there's kind of I couldn't have got through yada 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 without Jesus, which puts it in a much more kind of, what difference does Jesus make in my life now, or being part of the church making my life now as well, which I think is a helpful part of testimony. And like you said, like some of that stuff you talked about, it's kind of 15 years ago, and I became a Christian when I was about 17, which is knocking on 17 years ago. So be like, yeah, but what about the last 17 years? Oh yeah, well that's not part of it, just
right.
So yeah, I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? There is more to the story than just how you got there. There is that ongoing thing. So yeah, your testimony is not just how you became a Christian.
And I think some of the stuff around just part of what it means to be a Christian. So, for example, what we believe about what happens when you die. Like that's not something that we would necessarily regard as part of our testimony necessarily. Sure. But actually, if we're meeting someone who's terminally ill and terrified about that, then it's an opportunity to go, well, this is what the Bible says, and this is how that good news has changed my view of that situation. Yeah. And so it's still talking through, okay, this is how my Christian faith affects my view of the world, going backwards but also going forwards as well. So yeah, great. So I guess we're to be witnesses, aren't we, for Jesus? So, and that isn't necessarily always just the specifics of our story, but all those things. So great, okay. And then you've got here as your third point, it's your testimony. It's not a story about you. Really? Is it not about you? Not about me? What? Yeah, and and we've kind of alluded to it a few times already, and it's confusing because we keep using the language of my story.
Yeah,
right? I suppose that's just for ease, isn't it? Really.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, a testimony is not a story about us. It's a story about what God has done in us, and as I said before, how could a story about God be boring?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's encouraging. It is helpful for us to remember it's not a story about. It isn't about us primarily, Whereas, of course, we'll all have different stories, and there may be parts of our story that connect with people more than someone else's story. Ultimately, if what is the factor that stays the same in all these stories is Jesus, isn't it? So you can see Jesus is right at the centre of all this, and actually we can. I think that gives us a confidence that it doesn't rely on the specifics of what I say or do now. It's
thank goodness.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier and just saying I had a lady come up to me after a talk I gave last year, and we've been chatting for sort of 10-15 minutes, and she said, "Oh, you're so different in person. You really came alive when you're up there." And it was a bit of a backhanded compliment, as though she was going, "You're super boring now. In person, you're really not very interesting." But and I kind of said to her, "Well, look, actually, when I was up there, I wasn't talking about me. I was talking about God."
Yeah.
And now all I've got is me, and well, that's not quite as good. So, but actually that's the reality when we share our testimony. It's not about us, it's about Jesus. And so how could we not be excited about that? And how could anybody else consider it boring?
And, okay, point number 4, be prepared to be vulnerable and make sure you're sincere.
Yeah, so I think this for me is kind of a two-pronged point where one feeds into the other.
Okay.
So for me, it's kind of this idea of being vulnerable and being open. Actually, when we do that, it allows us to be, kind of sincere with people. That sincerity kind of shines through. I think it's kind of a well-used phrase. It's not our victories and successes that connect us to other people. It's often our weaknesses and our failures, our kind of mutual shortcomings, that when we're able to be open and vulnerable about them, those things really connect us much more than going, "Oh, I've won this award," and you sort of go, "Oh, I won an award one time as well." And I go, "Oh, that's great, aren't we both brilliant?"
100% attendance.
Yeah. And so it's this idea of actually when we really kind of dig a bit deeper, and be vulnerable enough to kind of share those shortcomings. That's the thing that really helps us connect as people, and in so doing, I think the sincerity of a story of a changed life really comes through. So
yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's great in testimony. I think it's something that's really important in preaching as well, actually. And I know, like we in Christian circles, people who preach often say about, there's an appropriate level of disclosure and vulnerability, and I think that's true. Sure. But the best connections I've ever made with people have often been in the moments where you just kind of open up and say, like, actually, this is pretty bad. Like, at the moment, I'm not doing great. This isn't great. And I think just because of my kind of general kind of view of human beings that I've kind of got from, my Christian worldview is we're basically all broken people. And whereas there may be some people out there who look like they've got it all together, we certainly live in a society today where people put on a front. We know that just the social media world, but I think it's probably always been the case that there's an element of kind of, you hear so many stories of people saying like, and I was smiling and I was saying I was happy for her, but I was dying inside, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I think when we're open, and we make ourselves vulnerable and we're open about stuff, actually it connects with people, because actually I think the majority of people are a bit broken anyway. Yeah. And so they kind of go, hey, look, these people are human, and I'm human too. Maybe it's okay to be human, and like there's a connection there, which you don't have necessarily with the person who just gets up and says, yeah, everything's amazing and stuff. So
and it gives people a license to be genuine and honest about their own situations, and therefore I think provides a gateway into a deeper conversation than just the kind of here's the best of me, and then the mask goes on or the gate comes down, and that's as far as I'm willing to go.
And maybe that ties back in a bit with the one about like it's not the which one was it, number 2? It's not just how you became a Christian, like. So I think there's maybe a pressure maybe Christians feel with, they give a testimony about like to say like, and I became a Christian and now everything's really good. Yeah. Whereas actually I think the reality for a lot of Christians is that like, well, actually life isn't super good now just because you're a Christian. Like people must have lots and lots of issues and struggles and problems and heartaches and all kinds of stuff, and sometimes being open about that. And like you say, I mean, you mentioned about talking to someone who's on their deathbed facing death. As Christians, we have a different perspective on those things we face, I suppose, whether it's on the deathbed or whether it's other things in life, and being open about those things I think can be helpful. Which maybe ties us into your last one here, number 5. You don't have all the answers. I guess your testimony isn't saying, hey, and now everything's sorted and I know everything. But I mean, what were you thinking on that one as well?
Yeah, well, I think largely this kind of comes from John 9, where Jesus has healed a blind man, and the religious leaders have, brought him into the courts, and they're accusing him in quite a volatile manner, and just putting all this pressure on the formerly blind man to call Jesus a sinner so that they can do what they want to do there. But under all this pressure and accusation, he simply says, I don't know if Jesus is a sinner or not. All I know is I was blind and now I can see. Yeah. And so despite all our kind of circumstances and the accusations that other people bring in regard to our experiences, you don't have to have all the answers. You can just say, hey, do you know what, this is who I used to be, this was meeting Jesus, this is who I am now, and like I say, you don't have to have all the answers in regard to that. It's just, hey, this is who I was, this is meeting Jesus, this is who I am now. I was blind, Jesus, now I can see. And so I think it's a very beautiful way to get out and share with that sense of freedom, that sense of I don't need to know every single answer to every single apologetic question that might be asked of me. I'm just saying, this is who I was and this is who I am now. Praise God.
And this is what Jesus has done for me. And of course there'll be people who want to say like, oh, well, that's good for you, but it's not the thing for me or whatever. And I think we just need to, like you say, we need to be okay with just going, I can't make someone, if they've got an issue with something, I can't make it happen. It's not on me to, convince them of that. But, we live in an age, don't we, where there's very much this idea of, you can't tell me about my lived experience, and if maybe, and that's often used in quite a negative way, but, great opportunity and testimony to say, look, well, this is our lived experience as Christians, and this is the difference Jesus has made for us. Yeah. And you might have objections, and I can't answer all of that. All I can tell you is this is the difference it's made in my life. So
Yeah, definitely. And at the end of the day, if you've got a physical problem, because we've all got a spiritual problem of needing that forgiveness and relationship with God. But if you had a physical problem, like say back pain, and someone came and said to you, "Hey, have you used this product that will help with your back pain? I've used it and it was really good." You're not going to go, "Right, bring out the scientific literature." Tell me everything about Voltarol. Other pain medicines are available.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But I think it does hold weight with people when we're honest enough to go, "Hey, this is my experience of Jesus."
So hopefully you found all that helpful. Next week, I think so. Glenn isn't going to be back around next week, but we'll probably still have a live cast for you. He's up in Dundee with a few of the interns. They're going to be doing another University Mission Week, so please do pray for him and pray for them, pray for the conversations that go on there, and for the Christian Union in their last-minute kind of preparations. But we'll still see you again next week, so do join us then. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.